We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Do you not understand that they are that way because you're Joe Flacco?
You just like to discredit things that people deserve credit for.
That you can't possibly be expected to defend that.
Talk about the game, Sam.
So,
who cares about what people think about us?
Yeah, I like football season, all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL Podcast. Steve Palazzolo here. Once again, flying solo. Sam Monson out on the road somewhere, hopefully not broken down, but making his way across country. E-Type Jag, him and his dad, making their way. Go check out Sam's pinned tweet for more information. You can follow along. You can donate to the charity that they're raising money for men's health. They're doing a lot of cool stuff. So go check out at PFF_Sam to find out just how well the trip is going. Happy Memorial Day to everybody here, Monday morning. We've got a great show today with Gregg Rosenthal of Around the NFL. I know we haven't had many guests on here recently. We had Rick Spielman on Thursday, which, by the way, I think was one of the best football discussions I've had in a long time. If you want to hear a former general manager actually give some insight and not speak like he's talking to the press and just giving bland answers where he's not trying to give away information, this is not that. I mean, this is Rick going into detail about their player evaluation process, their draft process, some of their hits and misses. It was a great discussion as far as getting to understand what a general manager has to do in his job. So that was Thursday's show. And so we made it a point to only have great guests. That's our goal. And I think Gregg, today from Around the NFL, one of the very best, if not the best, NFL podcast out there. Just another fun football discussion. We're going to talk a little bit about the best teams in the NFL, roster rankings, how they were constructed, quarterback rankings, and all sorts of good stuff. Before we get into Gregg, though, don't forget that the very best place to play fantasy football this summer is Underdog Fantasy. Their Best Ball Mania tournament has $10 million in total prize money. And the best part is you draft your fantasy football team, and that's it. That's all you have to do. There's no waivers, no trades, no in-season management. Underdog gives you your best score each week, and the highest scores at the end of the year win. The champion of Best Ball Mania last year drafted in June, so there's no time like the present to join Underdog and take your shot at $1 million draft. Plus, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100 when you sign up with the promo code PFF. And then if you play 10 of those dollars using promo code PFF, you get a free PFF subscription. It's a no-brainer, people. So what are you waiting for? Head to UnderdogFantasy.com or the App Store. Play $10 with code PFF. Draft your Best Ball Mania team today. So special shout-out to our friends at Underdog Fantasy. And then the PFF NFL Podcast is also brought to you by Cash App. Cash App is the easiest way to send, spend, and save your money. You can send or request money from your friends when they owe you for dinner, drinks, literally anything. Maybe outstanding bets when it comes to Brandon Graham sacks, whatever it might be. So Sam can send me all of his losing bets through Cash App. Besides just sending money back and forth, with Cash App, you can invest in stocks with as little as $1, as well as buy, sell, and send Bitcoin instantly. And Cash App also lets you design your own debit card completely free to spend money anywhere you'd like. Cash App will laser print it and mail it to you, all for free. And the card comes with free discounts at your favorite places called Boosts. So sign up for Cash App today using referral code TOUCHDOWN, which gives new users $15. It's promo code TOUCHDOWN for $15 free. That's right. All sorts of free stuff here on the PFF NFL Podcast. So thank you to Underdog Fantasy, to Cash App for making it all happen here on this Memorial Day. Let's get to Gregg Rosenthal co-host of the Around the NFL podcast. All right, well, welcome in to Gregg Rosenthal, co-host of the Around the NFL podcast. You'll see him all over NFL Network and various things, NFL.com. Greg, appreciate having you here.
First time, long time. I will try to come with as many contrarian takes as I can just to really fill Sam's shoes here.
Yeah, so I reached out to you. So you do actually listen to our podcast, right? Is it,
I
every
do.
now and again?
I do.
Or?
I mean, it's during the season, I'm sort of not a football podcast listener because it's like that at that point you should be covered. But off season, I do like sometimes put myself in your seat and just want to push back just like a little more. That's what I'm looking for you as a host, just a little more.
Oh, you want me to push back?
Yeah, Sam.
On Sam a little bit more?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's good. I didn't know we were jumping right into to feedback here. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's always what you want to do as a guest on someone else's successful show is immediately.
Let me tell you how you can host better.
Ideas.
Yeah, it's good having you, Greg. Appreciate you. Yeah.
I'm kidding. I love Sam's takes in general, but sometimes when he just goes really far.
Yeah, he goes far. He goes far sometimes.
Gotta rein him in.
We do. I'll let you play that role, though. You could play crazy take guy, and I'll practice pushing back just a little bit. I'm with you because I can't really listen. I try not to listen to NFL podcasts just so I can have my own views and not steal others. So that's kind of like my take on it. But I appreciate what you guys do over there at Around the NFL.
That's why draft season is when I really lock into others because I don't, and some of those Around the NFL colleagues here, we don't even pretend to be draft nicks. So that's where I'm like, okay, I'm going to at least know what the people are saying. You guys are great with the draft, especially.
But like inside podcasting here, having a little discussion here. When did you guys start the podcast? You guys have been doing this over 10 years, right?
Not quite. 2013, the summer, Chris Wesseling and I came out here, and Dan Hansis and Mark Sess were already there, and we started that summer. So we'll be hitting our 10th season this year. Yeah,
and Chris was awesome. We love Chris. He was. I think of Chris a lot. He was, Cincinnati native, and I was just joking with you off air. Like I watch a lot of old baseball games. I remember him always raving about like Eric Davis. From the Reds in the 80s and stuff. So I watch these old Reds games. I'm always thinking of him because that was like his team, right? That was his squad. But
that was his squad, and he always said Eric Davis at his peak was right there with Barry Bonds and anyone else is the greatest player.
I think he's right.
Can't argue.
I think he's absolutely right. But you guys have done such a great job of just having conversations, right, about football and just having a good time. And I think Sam and I have learned a lot from you guys, through the years and just kind of how you guys interact with each other, have fun. Obviously, you guys are having fun doing it and all that stuff. So that's been great. But yeah, you've been going at it for a while around the NFL.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it is crazy because when we started, it was something that we absolutely had to sneak around, had no support. Like they didn't want us to do it whatsoever. And as you know, like the internet writing business hasn't always been too stable. So now podcasting, who knew, turned into actually the part of the job that's valuable and it's keeping us employed.
Yeah, right. And so that was when you mentioned the draft stuff. I think what Sam and I have learned is people like just being a part of those conversations. So we end up just getting into like, what's this team going to do with number 5 overall, and what are the million different routes that they can go, and I think we've grown from like, super detailed player evaluation stuff to just kind of like, I think the conceptual, what do you think teams are going to do? What is the strategy here? And I think that's played pretty well.
Like we should try to be a little more like kind of basic bros, like the Around the NFL guys, like not let everyone know how smart we are every episode, but just sort of like dumb it down.
Which is why I don't push back on Sam too much. I don't want to be, Mr. Smarty Pants over here. So, well, you've been working on a series over at NFL.com, going through all of the starters, projecting the starters. So you've probably got a good feel. It's nice when you go through this exercise, right? Feel for the best rosters around the NFL.
I love this exercise. I always do it right after the draft, it's a great prep, and then you can feel like, okay, you're done. But yeah, like looking at like the deep teams, where teams are weak, like you get fooled sometimes by thinking like just because a certain team fills every hole, that like, okay, that's the best team. That's, you do want your strengths to be ultra strong. That can matter more. But the teams, especially where you can imagine the backups playing, always get a big edge for me, because everyone just kind of goes into the season assuming everyone's going to play. And as we know, it ends up being like you need about 40 good players going into the season.
It is one of the cool things about football, right? It's not just about filling the roster. Like, where your strengths are does actually matter. My most common reference was the Eagles for years. It's like always great offensive line, great defensive line, but they didn't win the Super Bowl until their perimeter players, their receivers and corners, were up to par in that 2017 season. So it's always an interesting exercise, like you said, like, hey, this team looks pretty good, all the starters look good, and you got a couple good backups, but like where your strengths are also matters as well. That's the whole positional value argument when it comes to NFL. So do you rank these rosters at all, or do you have a general ranking? I do want to get into what you think are the best rosters here.
Don't rank it as part of this exercise. I give like notes with each team, sort of like where they're thin, where they're not. Like I mentioned, I kind of hint at it, like based on the what I say underneath it. There's certain teams like the Cardinals come to mind that after doing this, I'm like, oh, they're a way bigger mess than I thought. Or the Colts. Yeah. This time, actually, I thought I was down on the Colts, and then when I went through it again, I'm like, oh, Chris Ballard did it again. Like, I'm gonna overrate the Colts again. So like you have surprises going through the exercise. But I don't have like a hard ranking, although it's like, I don't know, it's kind of hard not to put the Bills, if not at the top, like right near the top.
Yeah, Chris, coming out of the draft, Brandon Beane saying stuff like, yeah, we just wanted to add some yak in the draft. It's like, if you go into the draft just looking for some yak players, your roster's pretty in good shape. It is probably in pretty good shape. Now, that could come back to bite in 2 years when there's turnover and all that stuff. But usually if you're just like, we just need some yards after the catch type of guys in this draft, then you're probably in pretty good shape like the Bills are.
Right, because I think if you're making the list of like the best off seasons and the best rosters, the Bills would be on it. I just feel like they're a team that you look at where they are now, and I just feel like they're better than where they were in the divisional round when I thought they were ready to go win a Super Bowl. And they could have if their defense didn't clap.
Right.
I'm a little tired of like hearing about the coin flip when they've got a defensive head coach and they put that much into the defense and you can't get a stop.
13 seconds.
5 quarters. Yeah,
13 seconds away. And then little average armed Joe Burrow's got to go to the howling winds of Buffalo for the AFC Championship. Not that the Bengals couldn't have pulled it off, but it may have been a little bit different. So do you think the Bills have the best roster in the NFL then? Would you say top to bottom?
I do, but they're like a few other teams. And this is where, I know the kind of the PFF beliefs, kind of the mantras. I'd love to, we got to have you on our show and like go through each one of them and explain each other. But one of them, which I totally get and I understand is you just want your offensive line to be average, right? You don't want it to be a big problem. And they're like a handful of teams, I think, that have some of the better rosters in the league. I'd throw Denver in there. I would throw New Orleans, if not for quarterback, in there, where like offensive line is the biggest question mark. The fact that the Bills added a lot to their pass rush, I like everything they did with their pass rush, not just Von Miller, but Daquan Jones, Tim Settle. Like, I love the depth there. Like, I love the whole roster. The offensive line, like, if you're looking for a problem, they're probably hoping to be slightly above average, but that's about where they were last year, if that, and they don't look any better. So if you're another AFC East team, I feel like that's the one spot that could give you a little hope.
No, it's true. I mean, you look at who did you have as a projected right tackle? We had Spencer Brown there with Ryan Bates maybe playing guard, Cody Ford maybe trying to rejuvenate his career. I mean, it is
Saffold, who you brought in,
Saffold to left guard,
hasn't really been a good pass blocker. So in general, it seems like an offensive line that looks a little better with the run. I did have Spencer Brown and Ryan Bates. Yeah, you have Mitch Morse. Like, Dawkins wasn't the same guy for a chunk of last year. Then he seemed to recover it. It's not like an amazing offensive line, and Dable and Allen maybe make them look like a little bit better, and so that's something that could decline a little bit, but that's about it. Everything else I think looks pretty nice.
And so I think, when you talk about the PFF axioms and all that stuff, part of that strategy of having an offensive line, though, or an average offensive line, is having, say, a Stephon Diggs or a Jamison Crowder now replacing Cole Beasley. When you have a guy to get the ball to quickly, that's going to protect the offensive line enough. Like, if you had a bad receiving core and an average offensive line, that's when it starts to catch up, because you got to hold the ball a tick longer and you're putting more pressure on the line. But kind Kind of with
I
you
love
on the
that they
Bills.
gave money to like their fourth receiver, McKenzie. Crowder to me replaces Cole Beasley fine. Like
Perfectly fine.
That's close enough. I don't know. That's one thing I remember. Ever since that Kyle Shanahan Falcons team, I feel like that team hasn't gotten enough like love for changing the NFL. But part of it was like you need 4 receivers, and now doing this exercise, I used to say like teams are a little thin if they didn't have a good third receiver. Now I'm saying like they're a little thin if they don't have a 4th or a 5th. Like I like the teams that have 4 and 5, and the Bills are one of them.
You're speaking my language here, Greg. I mean, that is, I always describe it as tactical and, from a depth standpoint, right? Tactically, the Bills have all these different skill sets, right? You have the all-around receiver in Stephon Diggs. You have Gabriel Davis, who's, playoff Jerry Rice. But, he's a legitimate speed threat. They've always had that slot threat like a Cole Beasley. And then, having Isaiah McKenzie to, run the end arounds and all that fun stuff. I mean, you just have they've always had these specific roles for their receivers, which is great from just a game plan standpoint, but also depth is so crucial at that position. So, but I think that's today's NFL, right? I think it's depth at pass catcher. I think it's depth in the secondary. And the Bills add Kair Elam as the cornerback 2. Of course, the biggest splash move is Von Miller. It's easy to like the Von Miller move for this year. We'll see if that cap number ends up coming back to bite in future years. But for right now, yeah, it definitely looks like the Bills are pretty strong all around.
Yeah, I'm not really coming strong with like the contrarian Sam take here to start. Well, I'll try.
Well,
harder.
Sam would say draft Tyler Linderbaum at center and play 2 centers. Just figure it out later. Just figure it out later.
I don't know. They needed a cornerback. I mean, they got a hit on that pick too. That would be the other spot beyond the offensive line that there's like a little bit of concern that you have to hit on that, but you kind of trust them to develop, and you give them a little extra credit because they hit on the Tre'Davious White pick so well to start the McDermott era. And
they've done
one since that.
All of their secondary moves, really, even like a Teron Johnson. Like, who knows Teron Johnson? He's been one of the better slot corners in the NFL over the last couple of years. They've done a great job with their safeties, with all their corners in Buffalo. So there is that kind of benefit of the doubt you might give them as far as what they've done there. What about beyond the Bills? Who else is in that echelon for you?
All right, I would throw in like the Bucks would probably be next. I don't really have a lot that I can find fault with the Bucks. They're weirdly like, I don't think they're slipping under the radar, but just people are tired of talking about them. But
right.
I love that roster, and then it gets into the next group, which is a lot of the AFC teams. I'd throw the Chargers in there, the Broncos, another team with the offensive line where it's the questions, the Ravens, the Bengals. The Packers are certain, and the Rams are certainly in there too. Like to me, that's a big group, but they're all groups where they pretty much can fill out every hole except for like maybe one question mark per team. With the Bucks, I don't even know if I have that question mark. Like, what to you is their biggest concern?
I mean, the Bucks. It's interesting because last year, like they were the obvious pick here, right? It's like you just won the Super Bowl. You literally brought back every player. You brought back every coach. Nothing changed. Bucks are back, and you don't have exactly the same thing. But I think when you talk about if the Bucks are going to have issues, it's going to be injuries in the secondary, injuries at receiver like they had last year, or the offensive line potentially.
But if you're starting with injuries, it's like, well, yeah, that you could say that with every team.
So you're saying
there's part.
I'm just looking at. When you're the Bucs, you're the Bills, you're the Chiefs, you're like, we're winning a Super Bowl, right? So what are the things that might keep us from a Super Bowl? But yeah, as far as like the starters for the Bucs, we don't know who the left guard is. Last year we did, right? We knew who their 5 starters are. So we don't know who the starting left guard is. And maybe just the turnover in the at safety, Logan Ryan and Mike Edwards trying to replace Jordan Whitehead. I mean, that's it as far as questions this year versus last year. It's not
have Winfield. You have Gage, and part of the value of Tom Brady is you make those guys, Tyler Johnson or Cyril Grayson, work for the time that you need them. If you need them, you drafted Gadecki on the offensive line. That one thing I don't know if this is a PFF thing or not, but to me, coaching is so much more important on the offensive line than
I agree
anywhere else. That like. no one would care about Alex Kappa if he wasn't on the Bucs. You know, he wouldn't have gotten paid if he wasn't on the Bucs. And I just sort of assume that they can slide in someone into one of those guard spots. Gadecki.
Yeah, I think they'll be fine there eventually. But again, we're nitpicking question marks here. But I'm with you on the coaching on the offensive line. I do think O-line coaches move the needle. I don't know. There's 8 to 10 really good ones that I think have a consistent track record, you know, and then it's kind of a crapshoot after that.
And the secondary used to be something that I feel like people thought, okay, that's the weakness. Now I look at it like, to me, that's a strength. Like, I like that cornerback group. I know they were hurt last year. Carlton Davis surprised me that he didn't get more money than he did.
Yeah.
But to have a group that young that's played that much together, that's one thing I definitely give a little extra credit for in this exercise, which is like the combination of continuity and youth. Like if you have a team that's in the Bills and the Bucs probably are the best teams with that, where like if you have a team that's young and has been together, that's kind of what you want.
The other nitpicky question about the Bucs is maybe their pass rush, like their pure 4-man rush, right? Shaquille Barrett on one side, JPP's not coming back. He wasn't great in that sense last year anyway. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka trying to probably fill that role. And Ndamukong Suh's fascinating. That dude plays over 800 snaps every year. Our grades keep going down on him, and I'm always like, man, just give him 500 snaps or 400 snaps. Maybe he could still bring it, but he's still there. He's been down there every snap, year after year.
He's still unsigned.
He's still unsigned, so you got to replace him.
He was the best player. Like he was the best player in multiple games, or maybe the best player in their Super Bowl run defensively. Certainly one of them. Yeah. And he was the best player on the field against the Rams too. Like he had a great game in that game against the Rams. So it's just like maybe just he's one of those guys. Bring out like week 8, like see if he wants to just sit out a while.
Every year I hypothesize like give me the aging defensive lineman, cut his workload in half, and let him go. And you don't always see teams do that, but I think it could be a way to maximize those guys. But I'm with you on the Bucs there. You mentioned the Broncos. I mean, they had a good roster last year. They were probably high in this exercise last year. You just said, well, Teddy Bridgewater's the quarterback. But yeah, then adding in guys like Randy Gregory and of course Russell Wilson's the big play there. So is Denver good enough to win the AFC West?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the bigger concern for me is like the defense for the most part underperformed last year. Like I love it on paper, but it wasn't really that good. And now you're losing Vic Fangio and you're replacing him with a guy in Evero that's in his like coaching tree. But it's a weird thing for a new coach to take on a team with Super Bowl expectations. And there's like a few of them this year. I mean, maybe not Super Bowl expectations, but weird first-time head coach spots where it's like Josh McDaniels is taking over a team that made the playoffs. And there's going to be a lot of expectations. And it's a good roster. But Mike McDaniel's taking over a roster where everyone thinks they're just going to be better. But I don't know. They've been above 500 2 straight years with Brian Flores. And then this is another one where it's like 3 first-time head coaches where if you don't have a winning record this year, people are going to be very upset. But on paper, like they've just got so much depth of weapons and so much depth of pass rushers and so much depth in the secondary. And like, those are the spots that, I mean, you'd love to have depth everywhere, but those are 3 great spots to have depth where I'm not a huge like Russell Wilson guy at this point of his career, but I don't think he has to be 2017-18 Russell Wilson just for them to win a lot of games.
Was going to ask, where do you land on the Russell Wilson takes, you know, as far as let him cook, chuck it 50 times a game, or do you think there's something to Seattle somewhat limiting him through the years? Because did they do that because they know him, or because Pete Carroll's a dinosaur, he just likes to run the ball, man? You know, like where's the truth there?
I just think that like that close in the middle, closer to the side of like, yeah, they should have been throwing more in general, you know, in terms of their process, but he's also like maybe just a smidge overrated and a little streaky over the last few years, certainly. In that, look, the one thing I do push back on is like I feel like they tried to get there with him,
right,
and change the offense for him, and it just like is always going to be a little bit of the Russell Wilson offense, which is just like he's good at what he's good at, throwing deep out to the outside, might not be good throwing over the middle, holds the ball forever, he's going to make plays, and you do worry like, can he make as many plays as he gets older? But I feel like you get that one really good Russell Wilson year probably in his first year in Denver. I don't know why. Like that you get it closer to the top 5, even if he's not a top 5 quarterback, like closer to the top 5 for like a year, a nice little honeymoon period.
Even with a new system, Nathaniel Hackett, new system, it's the Rodgers system, it's that whole whatever.
But in
West
theory,
Coast.
isn't that kind of what he was supposedly playing in last year too?
Last year's offense was so weird to me because Russ already, I don't want to use the word boom or bust, but like the old system was a lot of play action, downfield shots, right? And I'm kind of with you too. Articulating this is difficult, right? Can Russ be over and underrated at the same time? Isn't that like the Tony Romo special? Like you're both all at the same time?
No, Tony Romo was just underrated.
He was just underrated?
That's my stance.
Yeah, he probably was. With Russ, it was almost like because they didn't let him cook at times, they played to his strength so much that his efficiency numbers looked great, right? I mean, the fact that he just ran play action and took downfield shots played to his strength so much that if you did, throw the ball 5 to 10% more time, maybe he wouldn't be as good as inefficient, and the nerds wouldn't love his numbers as much. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the way that Seattle held him back helped his per play efficiency numbers, which were unsustainable, I guess is my way of breaking it down.
But you have, here you have more weapons than he's ever had, and he's had plenty of weapons in his career. It's not like he's been.
Let me push back on that though.
Okay.
Let me push back on. Is there anything better than DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett? I'm with you as far as like receiver 3, receiver 4. I mean, those dudes are starters, right? And tight end matters. But as far as a 1-2 punch of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, you're not getting better than that from Denver, as much as I love Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton and all those guys. So better depth, but man, losing DK, he was a perfect fit for Russell Wilson.
And Lockett too.
Lockett
feels like as big a loss or close. I am projecting here. I'm projecting Cortland Sutton to not be the guy he was a year ago when he really wasn't who he was before the injury. And I'm a Jerry Jeudy believer that I think Jerry Jeudy should be at the same level as a Lockett this year.
Right.
Like, shouldn't he be? And Sutton, Sutton's not DK. But the depth too is at running back. It's a good running game. It's a good pass catching running game with Williams and Gordon. Good enough. Like Alberto, I've believed in the last couple of years that he can do something too. It's just like all those options, and I think they will throw a lot. I mean, I assume they will.
Yeah, I'm with you on the Broncos receiving core and all that stuff. I like KJ Hamler coming off injury. I love his speed and quickness. Judy's an interesting one. I feel like the underrated aspect of receiver play when you're slight, either short or on the skinnier side, is just toughness. And whether it's Julian Edelman or Steve Smith, they just have this toughness, this tenacity that I think made them whatever they are, Hall of Fame, borderline Hall of Famers, whatever you want to call Julian Edelman, right? Does Jerry Jeudy lack that? Because I'm with he's awesome. Route running, those bendy knees and all that stuff, whatever. He just gets open. Does he lack some of that middle of the field toughness to make him as complete of a receiver as he needs to be? I'm a Jeudy believer too, but the more I watch receivers, I'm like, man, I want to see that Edelman. I want to see that Steve Smith in some of these guys, and I wonder if Judy's lacking some of that.
No, that's fair. And he might be suspended to start the year, which is something to keep in mind for them, at least like early. But that's the thing, is this is a team that I feel like can survive that. And I love that they just kept stacking pass rushers too. It just feels like K'Wan Williams was a nice signing at Nickelback. The secondary looks great. You have Malik Reed as like your third rusher. You draft Benito as your fourth, I guess. I like DJ Jones as a signing. Draymond Jones is like a good underrated player. It's just like, it just feels like there's less ways for this team to mess up unless the coaching staff isn't that good. Yeah. Which is a total possibility. People just assume guys can coach, and I'm sort of the belief there's probably only like 5 or 6 staffs that really matter positively and then really matter negatively, and most are in the middle, and we probably like get a little carried away, and most likely they'll be in the middle and then they're fine.
Where does Urban Meyer fall in that?
Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
that's sort of what I mean. I'm always a little skeptical of the guy like Hackett, who clearly have good relationships with the media and have gotten like extra good coverage over the years, though. Like that's That's my corner. Is like, all right, be a little worried about those guys.
Wasn't the Mike McDaniel rise a little weird? Like, I hadn't heard him speak until about week 8 of last year, and all of a sudden he's like the coolest press conference guy ever, making awesome football points, making jokes, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, this dude's hot coaching candidate. And I'm not taking that away from him. It was just funny how that happened, unless I missed something along the way.
No, I'm with you. Although he almost is the other way around. Like, he felt like he stayed off the radar so long that like Kyle Shanahan was purposefully burying his career as long as possible, and then eventually people just kind of wised up. He doesn't seem like he's playing the game too much.
So some of the other rosters you mentioned, AFC North, Ravens, Bengals. Did you throw the Browns in there as well as far as best rosters?
I didn't. They were one of the teams that I thought like a little less of after doing this exercise. And tell me if you disagree, that their offensive line has been great and still should be like very, very good. But am I locking that group in as one of the best groups right now? Willis was not as good a year ago. Conklin off an injury like that. It centers a little bit of a question mark. Like, it should be a good group, but then you have that plus a pretty thin wide receiver group.
Right.
The secondary, like, you like the starting corners, but there's not great depth there. You don't really have great defensive tackles. I feel like they were like a little overheated as like this ready-made Super Bowl contender that all you need to do is add Deshaun Watson. Like, yeah, if you're talking about the 2020 Browns, absolutely. But I think they're a little diminished maybe to where they were a couple of years ago.
No, I think those are all good points. So put Watson aside just for a minute here. Even if you just look, the Browns last year at this time on paper were probably top 3 or 4, because I think even last year's receiving core on paper with OBJ and Jarvis Landry, you're like, all right, that's good. They don't run a lot of 3 wide receivers. And Rashard Higgins was there. So now it's Amari Cooper and an inconsistent Donovan Peoples-Jones and Hakeem Grant. Like, I love Amari Cooper, but
David Bell, I think they're like counting on David Bell to play.
David Bell being that
guy, which is a lot to ask. I mean, maybe he will.
So I think when you look at last year versus this year, you can say the receivers are a little bit worse. You lose a Troy Hill in the secondary for whatever that's worth. Like, the secondary depth isn't as good as it looked last year at this time. The defensive line depth isn't nearly as good as it was last year at this time, even with Jadeveon Clowney coming back. And then you lose J.C. Treader at center. Yeah, so you're trying to take this last, like, 4/5 of their offensive line, you'd say, was really, really good. The one question was left tackle. Now you have 2 question marks, right? I would say on the offensive line. So, yeah, I think that's fair that the Browns, from a roster standpoint, are probably a tick below where they've been in recent years, even with Deshaun Watson coming in replacing Baker Mayfield.
Right, and it's also, you had the like optimism. You're bringing in John Johnson. He's going to be a huge difference maker a year ago. He's probably entering this season. I'm a fan of John Johnson, but if he has the same season he had a year ago, they'd probably cut him, I think, considering his contract.
It was his worst year as a pro, right?
And I like Clowney. Them bringing Clowney back makes a ton of sense, and you now have Winovich, who I always thought could do something as a third rusher, which made more sense than if he was like starting. So there's still plenty to like. Like, I would say it's a top 12 roster, top 10 roster. But Ravens and Bengals, I think, are right there with the top groups. I don't really see a lot to find fault with. I feel like Cincinnati's been stacking pretty good off seasons now for a couple of years.
Yeah, the Bengals, there was 2015 or so. Was the last time I think they were in this position where you're like, man, that's a good roster in Cincinnati. And then it all just fell apart. The offensive line fell apart. They couldn't replace their playmakers. They have battled back to get to that point. Of course, Joe Burrow pulls it all together, but just a marvelous job, I think, of building their offensive line. For the idea of, part of the concept of creep back toward average is the idea that you can get maybe 2 starters for the price of 1 on the offensive line, which I think they did, with Ted Karras and Alex Kappa. Essentially, instead of one $16 million Brandon Scherf, you got 2 $14 million worth of, $14 million worth of 2 players, right? So I love what Cincinnati did. And then they go into the draft and it's like, the Bengals don't have needs at pick 31. They could just pick the best player. Like, when was the last time that happened in Cincinnati?
Right. And I sort of ended the piece with like, yeah, the roster looks way better and it's pretty complete. But ultimately, like they'll go as far as their top 5 skill position players are special
for sure.
But there's but that's where I was talking about like youth and continuity. Like who has a better combo of youth and continuity at the biggest positions? Burrow, Mixon, Chase, Higgins, Boyd, like as them. So if those guys take another step, and there's reason to believe they can, then they'll be fine. I do worry though as you're talking. I'm like, it's like, the offensive line's set. You got Ted Karras and Alex Kappa and Jackson Carman with like an offensive line staff that has kind of been shown to be a net negative. They haven't been able to coach the offensive line. So that's like one concern. But I love the Collins signing, and I love the idea that you guys have to pretend not to be Bengals fans then in Cincinnati. Like just become Bengals fans. Like little
the stadium's
bit, right?
I can I have a great arm. I can throw a stone to the stadium from here.
Really?
Well, 12 blocks. I can't throw the ball that far anymore. But it's not. It was just the city was buzzing. It was nice to.
I mean, I like
LA.
I like the Bengals. I like the Chris Henry, T.J. Houshmandzadeh Bengals. I've sort of always liked the Bengals for some reason.
Yeah.
But like, what's the point of talking about it if you don't like a bunch of teams each year? At least for me, like you got to have some that you like, and it'd be stupid to not like the Bengals right now. Come on.
Yeah, they're in a good spot, but man, it's one of those years where at the end of the season, even the teams that did everything right and on paper they made all the right moves, they're going to win 8 games. I mean, that's going to be the AFC, whether it's the Dolphins or the Browns or the Broncos or one of these teams that we're talking about that has a great roster is going to be like 7-10 or 8-9, and it's going to feel like this massive disappointment, like blow it all up, when the reality is I think it's just because the AFC is so deep, and the AFC North in particular. I run into a lot of Bengals fans over here where it's like, why aren't the Bengals getting enough love? It's like, okay, you made a great Super Bowl run. There's like, you're still one play away from maybe losing to the Raiders in the wild card round at the, and then they make a great run, but it's like, don't sleep on the Ravens. You can't sleep on the Browns. The Steelers are always going to at least be solid in the mix. It's just such a tough path in the AFC. So even these best rosters, I think there'll be some mediocre records last year for some of the best teams in the league.
Ravens should bounce back strong after the bad injury luck. The Steelers, like the fact that they'll have an over-under of 8.5 or whatever it is, I don't know where it is, and that I'll probably be like, believing that Mike Tomlin will figure out, is all just about Steelers like magic dust and Tomlin.
Yes.
Because they like on paper compared to the rest of that division, they're much worse. The offensive line,
of course,
I like what they did, but it's still worse.
Right.
Quarterback, I don't know if Stephon Tuitt's ever going to be Stephon Tuitt again. They're a little thin there, and then the secondary is as questionable, if not more, than it's ever been. Like writing down Ahkello Witherspoon and Levi Wallace and Cameron Sutton is like as their top 3 corners. That feels like 3 okay number 3s.
That's what I love. Levi, like those are dudes that I would sign. Right, if I'm in the seat of general manager, I'm signing Levi Wallace and I'm signing Ahkello Witherspoon, but as my 3rd and 4th corners. Right. I'm signing them because
I think they had a good offseason, actually. I think signing Mason Cole, signing James Daniels, I like that they actually were a little more aggressive than they usually are. Like, these guys can all play and fill holes, but do they have enough special players on the roster to sort of make up for it in coaching?
I mentioned you do the QB index every week, right, over at NFL.com, ranking the quarterbacks. Do you remember where Big Ben, where did you fall on Big Ben's season last year? And then my question about the Steelers is, if you think he was as bad as we did, isn't there a chance that Mitchell Trubisky and or Kenny Pickett can actually improve the quarterback play in Pittsburgh, as crazy as it seems?
No, I agree. I think they should. I would say the baseline would be they'll probably be a little bit better than Roethlisberger was. I think when it was 32 a week and it was I think at the end of the year I did the who played the most amount of snaps. He couldn't have been higher than 27 off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I mean, Zach Wilson would have been behind him for sure, and Darnold would have been behind him, and there aren't many that were for sure behind him other than that. I'm with you, and they coached around it pretty well.
Yeah, they had to. Yep.
But I don't trust my draft evaluations, but like Kenny Pickett doesn't get me too excited.
Either. And I don't think any of them get anybody excited, which is why so many quarterbacks dropped. Want to finish up on the Ravens here. Any concerns with that receiving core or of all the teams in the NFL? It's like, hey, it's the Ravens. With the way they're going to run the ball, they don't need to have that third and fourth receiver. But even 1 and 2 present massive question marks for the Ravens.
Yeah, it's a concern. I would have loved if they had signed Landry. I would love it if they signed OBJ. I've always felt like there's a little bit of value to be had in signing guys coming off of injuries to 2 or 3 year deals and just like eat that first half a year. OBJ is so obviously going to help your team in some way, and probably you could offer him the most amount of guaranteed money and spread it out a little bit. If they do sign one more decent veteran, and there's OBJ would certainly be at the top of the list, but Will Fuller's out there, like
get him in this offense for sure.
Like Julio signing and getting 50 balls for 615 yards as like a poor man's older Derek Mason would actually help this team. So like they just need to sign someone, right? Like wouldn't that help them? Because I like Duvernay. I think they like Duvernay is the feel I get. I think they probably see Duvernay replacing a higher percentage of Marquise Brown than the average person could do.
You think they like him as an all-around?
He could maybe be 75% of Marquise Brown.
Sometimes I think I heard some anonymous executive say this. If the Ravens could draft a punter in the first round, and everybody would say, "Oh, look at that genius team, the Baltimore." But yeah, that's the jealousy around the league. But I'm sure I'm guilty of that sometimes, because I went out and I said, Tyler Linderbaum, they signed a center that they're going to make into a playmaker. They're going to get this guy in space, and they're going to change their run game because of Tyler Linderbaum. Like, they're forward thinking. But that was my take on Duvernay a couple years ago. It's like, all right, if the Ravens are smart, they know they've got the regular run game down, and they can run block, and they've got Lamar. The next piece is trickeration and jet sweep game and all that stuff, and that's Duvernay, right? I mean, he always felt like he was the other playmaker that they were drafted to get the ball into his hands in space and kind of take the run game to the next level. And then I thought they draft Rashad Bateman, and last year at this time they still had Sammy Watkins, they still had Marquise Brown. That should have been the best receiving core that they had, along with Duvernay, right? But they don't necessarily anymore. To me, the next iteration of the Ravens,
for a minute for 5 games, I don't know what happened there, and that was even without Bateman doing anything.
Right. I mean, there was a point where it's like, this is the best receiving core that the Ravens have had. This is what gets them over the hump, right? You can win games with the run. You can win games now through the air. I don't see them having the same ability to win purely through the air, unless it's just, like 2019 Lamar was very dependent on the tight ends, and they just kind of go back to that with the 15 tight ends that they have on the roster right now.
Right. I struggled like writing down a third receiver. It would have been Tylan Wallace or James Proche. So I just put Nick Boyle, because at this point, Nick Boyle is going to play more snaps, I would certainly project, than those guys, and just put 2 tight ends. I mean, that's the thing, though. If they did sign an OBJ, or let's even say a Will Fuller, or I don't know if he fits as much, but then, like, if you convince yourself that, like, Andrews is your 1, Bateman's your 2, whoever that person is your 3, and you're
Fuller's
a run
your deep threat,
team,
Fuller's just like, when you're going to run the ball that much and run play action, my Will Fuller takes. Get him on every offense. Then I don't hate this. Yeah,
hate that group. I'm also probably biased because Lamar, as a Patriots fan, I grew up a Patriots fan. I'm not as big as one as I used to be, but like, they were a team that annually going into the season, wide receiver looked like their worst position group on the roster, and it often was, and it didn't matter that much. But that's part of the benefit of having Tom Brady.
That's the Brady. I actually meant to ask you that. I was gonna ask you what your fandom was growing up. So where are you from again?
Yeah, I'm from Western Massachusetts. So I was a big Patriots fan growing up.
Did I know that? Have we talked about that?
I was through some bad years. Like the first game I went to, Doug Flutie ran an end around against the Colts to win the game. I think they won 6 games that year. And when they won 6 games, it was like so exciting. Like every win felt like a party. Dick McPherson, people like thought he was coach of the year. Like it gave me a very different view of the NFL, that like fans can be totally excited by 6 wins, at least like at that point, because when expectations are that low, that like every win is a party.
Was that back in 88, 89?
That was 88. I would have been
88.
like 9 years old then. So by the time I got to high school, they had Parcells and
Right.
Bledsoe, and things started to turn around a little bit.
Have we talked about you being from Western Mass?
I don't think so.
Because I'm from
not
North
really.
Reading, on the the normal side of the state. So how about that? But
I mean, yeah, mine. There's a lot of like farms. People think if you're from Massachusetts, you're from Boston.
were you in like North Adams? Where were you?
It was called Wilbraham, right next to Springfield.
Oh, I know.
Just like
I know a girl from Wilbraham.
A lot of fruit and turkey farms.
Yeah, Wilbraham.
Cows. Yeah.
I knew her.
Home of Friendly's ice cream. You're going on the Mass Pike.
That's Home of Friendly's.
And there's a big, bushes, shaved on the side of the side. I got to be careful there. I know you have the Manscaped ad there. It says like Home of Friendly's ice cream, on the side. That's how people know.
Friendly's is great. I love it. Look at this. What a connection here. So you grew up. Yeah, I didn't jump on the Patriots bandwagon because by the time I started watching football a little bit later. By the time I wanted to start watching football, all the Patriots games were like blacked out because they were just, they could never sell it out and, the blackout rules. And then Bledsoe kind of turned things around.
Was that a thing? I was far enough away that it didn't matter. I feel like
Wilbraham, they gave you all the games. They felt bad for you. They just put all the games.
I feel like I got all the games.
I don't know. Back in like 90 to 92 and stuff like that, and there was, 100 people at Foxborough Stadium. Anyway, we digress. So here's what I want to jump to. We've talked one NFC team. That's the nature of this year's NFL.
Right, and the Rams should have been in that mix. I certainly don't put them like behind the Chargers, Broncos, Bengals, Bolts. Like they're in that group.
You an annual Chargers believer here? Off-season hype. We buy in. We all drink the Kool-Aid every May, June, July.
I am. Last year, I think just like a contrarian part of me actually sort of dropped off last year relatively.
Yeah.
I was like, I think they're a borderline playoff team. I'm not really buying into my usual Chargers.
Boy, were
hype.
they.
And that was right.
As close to the border of the playoffs
totally
as you can get. Yes, they were.
Now I'm totally back in.
Yeah, they've done a really good job, right? I mean, filling holes, making splash moves, and building around Justin Herbert while he's on the cheap. A lot of good stuff there.
Like, why do you think their defense was so disappointing, though? That was the thing I feel like people don't talk about a lot with the Chargers, that like Brandon Staley took over for Gus Bradley. The roster wasn't any worse, and they were worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Staley – it's weird because I don't think anybody's removed any like genius labels from Brandon Staley because I know there's the small little football Twitter community and then there's like the analytics community little niche area. I mean, they're still all in on Staley. The dude's going for every single fourth down. The football
I am too. I think it's just like defense is hard and things happen but they weren't good on defense. They did not really play to their personnel. I would say they underperformed a little bit.
They got gashed against the run. I mean, every excuse I try to make with Staley, though, it's like, oh, it was the first year system and all that stuff, but it was all stuff that he did the previous year with the Rams, right? He had first year implemented a new system, and they were unbelievable in 2020. But I think it is the fickle nature of defense and the fact that they were just so weak. Not that Aaron Donald, not that he just didn't know how to coach without Aaron Donald, but he went from having Aaron Donald and a decent defensive line to having a horrible defensive line where the idea of, hey, invite the run here, take your 4 yards, and teams were like, sure, we'll take 7. That came back to bite, I think, and the Chargers certainly made a lot of moves to tidy that up this year. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like with Khalil Mack in there. I also think it's interesting that they have J.C. Jackson, Asante Samuel Jr., and, just playmakers, dudes who can get the ball, turn it over, get more possessions. I can't wait to see what that looks like as far as the Chargers defense goes.
Yeah, J.C. Jackson, I mean, I don't think he's like underrated for his, ball skills and anything. Like that's what everyone knows him for, but they're pretty damn unique. I mean, if this seems like a perfect spot for him to like end up being quite high on the all-time interceptions list, or certainly the interceptions list of the last 20 years while I've been covering football. Like he's already getting there. He's next to another guy, next to the son of Asante Samuel, who's up there, and like he's another one who's got good ball skills. Like this defense should be fun. They'll probably end up giving up a lot of big plays. Kenneth Murray is a bit of a concern as a starter, but I like the free agents that they signed, Joseph Day, Austin Johnson, and you would think they'll get enough turnovers with Jackson and Derwin playing together and Bosa, as long as Bosa's healthy.
There's still always this perception too that when players leave Bill Belichick, they just like crumble. And Asante Samuel had good years, senior, right? He had good years post Patriots, right, with the Eagles and everything, right, with made plays on the ball and all that stuff. So the fact that the Patriots let J.C. Jackson walk, are they over there saying, "Oh, he's a product of our system. We built it. We made." Because even like Malcolm Butler, who's now back in New England, he had a couple decent years after leaving. It's not like every single player who leaves New England is terrible, but is there any concern with that with a J.C. Jackson when you sign him to a huge deal?
Not a ton, although it's a different system, so that does worry you a little bit. But I would say he was unquestionably the best cornerback that they developed since. I mean, I would put him ahead of Asante.
Yeah.
Since the early days. I mean, he improved every single season. I think he's like more physical than people think. Like,
yeah,
he got so much better, like as a cover corner and doing the small things. I think they wanted to keep him. They just wanted to pay him like $14 million a year, and the Chargers were willing to pay him 17. It's not like they weren't extending. I don't know why they didn't tag him though. They just, I don't know. They make curious decisions.
It's funny. A lot of the studies I was doing this offseason on our draft grades and measurables and all these things that translate at the NFL level, like J.C. Jackson might be the biggest outlier according to those numbers. As far as if you looked at his college profile from a production standpoint, from a measurable standpoint, everything's bad. There's nothing that says...
Really?
Yes. Everything
I thought he just didn't get drafted because of his off-field stuff, which was it was understandable. He shouldn't have been drafted, and that sort of doesn't get talked about with him. But since he's been a pro, it seemed that surprises me. Yeah,
it's just I know that he was hyped up in college and all that stuff, but as far as like on-field production, it wasn't great, and his workout actually wasn't great. Like we sit there in March and like go through all his arm length. It's only 31. I mean, he's got 31.5-inch arms. He's got below average arm length. Like all these things that like cross people off the list. He's crossed off every list by these numbers.
Wow.
So for us.
Well, he's like the ultimate eye test guy. I mean, mostly you're gonna probably lose on those guys, I guess. But man, he is an eye test guy in the NFL. I just feel like you can see it. I love cornerback play. I love watching the secondary, and like as a Patriots fan, like who they came. That's how they really announced themselves was playing the secondary. Like he's the best guy that they've developed in the last 15 years.
Yeah, and that's me agreeing with you, right? Saying like coming out of college as a prospect, nothing said he should hit. The fact that the Patriots developed him into what he is, I think is really impressive. I want to talk a little bit about when we're talking best rosters. We haven't mentioned the Packers. We haven't mentioned the Chiefs. And both of those teams, and we haven't mentioned last year's AFC number 1 seed, the Tennessee Titans. We make it a point to never forget the Titans. We always remember them here. So, to me, this is the biggest storyline in the NFL. The impact of wide receiver 1. We're going to learn a lot of stuff with Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and A.J. Brown moving on. Where do you stand in this whole debate? The Chiefs, the Packers, and the Titans moving on from what I think have been absolute massive force multipliers. And now it's like, the Chiefs have lost a little luster. So have the Packers. And, the Titans, for whatever they are, I don't think they were the best real team in the AFC last year, but they're going to lose A.J. Brown. Where do you stand on the losses there and then the additions for the teams that picked up those players?
Well, those three are so different. Like the Packers should have been in that group of the best rosters. Like I'm not that worried about the Packers because I think their defense looks great, and just about every position group other than wide receiver looks good to great. So I'm not worried about them. The Chiefs I'm not that worried about either, because any offense with Mahomes and Reed and Kelsey, I'm ultimately not that worried about. I think they have enough. But how the league changed, I think it was like the most transformational offseason I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I think even just because we just did it, I think people are like too afraid to be, in the moment and recency bias. It's like, no, the NFL totally changed this offseason.
Yeah.
I think forever, not just the whole idea of how you're evaluating receivers, but this trend towards trades, which I feel like I've been talking about forever, but I maybe it was a little too early because it wasn't really happening. Like the Eagles and the Patriots, when they played in the Super Bowl, they were the most trade-heavy teams in the league. I remember talking a lot. Like they had made like 10 or 11 trades in the previous year or two, and it was the most of any teams, and the Rams were behind them. But these were like secondary players. They were improving their team for the most part on the margins. And now the NFL's totally embraced that's maybe a better or easier way to improve your roster than free agency or equal to with the draft. And the quarterback, I did not see it coming though, that the wide receivers would be getting valued that much ahead of cornerback, like really that much ahead of pass rusher. And I don't know what to say about it. I think it's a case-by-case scenario. I think the Titans are going to get hit hard because the Packers and Chiefs have so much else, and they have the quarterback especially. I think it wasn't a crazy team-building idea to do what they did. I don't come down that they're just like idiots or anything, but I'm sort of fascinated by it.
Yeah, my theory on it is we sit here and we're like, all right, how do you get a top 8 quarterback? I think every NFL analyst is going to agree. Your top 8 quarterbacks, your top 10 quarterbacks, whatever your cutoff is a massive advantage, right? And we're coming out of an era where it was pretty clear who those guys were, and a lot of them are gone now. And I think we're getting back to like, okay, we top 8 to 10. If you have one of those guys, you have a huge advantage. The teams that don't have that advantage, though, where's the drop off, right? Where's the point where the wide receiver one is actually more important than the quarterback, just because the next tier of quarterbacks is not completely interchangeable, but much closer to interchangeable, right? So, in other words, like Sam and I have done this exercise where it's like rank how many quarterbacks do you take before you take the number one receiver, right? Or how many quarterbacks do you take before you take the number one coach? Because you just mentioned maybe there's only 5 coaches that make an impact, right? So you might take like 8 quarterbacks, and then you take Belichick and Andy Reid and John Harbaugh, whoever you want to put in that group, right? And then the rest of the quarterbacks are there, right? But I think I think the NFL's saying, well, if I don't have a top 8 to 10 quarterback,
right,
and the difference between QB 11 and 20 is marginal, the only way I can maximize this dude is with the Tyreek Hill or with the Davante Adams. And we're going to see that, right? Like if Derek Carr puts up MVP numbers and Aaron Rodgers becomes Derek Carr, right? It goes back the other way statistically. We're going to realize the impact of Davante Adams. And same thing with Tyreek Hill, right? I mean, we're going to learn a lot this year.
And yet it's like tricky because I think Adams could easily have 1,270 yards and 8 touchdowns, and the Raiders could be somewhat disappointing as a team. And he still might be providing that force multiplier value that you're talking about.
True.
It's just like there's so much else going on in that team and the division that's working against them. And then people are going to like hit you with the narratives. I'm with you. And I just think people one of the things I really believe that in terms of team building is people really overrate the it's hard to win when you got that, second quarterback contract on. And I think you can extend that to whatever this contract's going to, whatever it is for Tyreek Hill and Davante Adams. Like, you're getting value out of those guys. There's so much wasted money on every team's cap every year, not just dead money. And by the way, like the Raiders, I'm looking at it, have $23 million in dead money. So that's almost as much as Davante Adams is making. But also like Chandler Jones is going to make, an average of 20 plus million on the cap. That's a much bigger risk to me.
Right.
Colton Miller, whatever you sign Colton Miller for, like that's a lot. Whatever, like Kenyon Drake, all these guys, like if you add up like the cap hits, those are the bigger issues. And people are always like, it's hard to do in that quarterback contract. It's like, no, I feel like if you're a smart team that can develop and make good moves, you got to have some faith in yourself, like the Rams do, that like, just add good players, and if you have a good coaching staff and make good decisions on the rest of it, you can develop and figure out the rest.
That's kind of my take on the Titans, right? I mean, I again, I'm an A.J. Brown wide receiver one believer. I feel like A.J. Brown has had more to do with Ryan Tannehill's career resurgence than Derrick Henry or just moving to Nashville, right? I think it's A.J. Brown, and we'll learn that information, maybe more about it this year. But I look at the rest of the Titans roster, and they're giving over $10 million a year to Zach Cunningham, Kevin Byard, who's awesome, but Bud Dupree, Harold Landry, Derrick Henry, Robert Woods at 16, like all these other guys. When it's like, man, I don't think night one of the draft, I'm the one player that I would want on my roster after night one of the draft that was moved was A.J. Brown. Like, that's the guy that I would want, even with the $25 million. And it's
right. I mean, Dupree's cap number is 20.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Taylor Lewan, it made sense, I think, when they signed him to that contract, but it hasn't really worked out.
Right.
He's at 15. Like, it's
I
crazy.
get it.
I think they just got caught flat-footed. I just think they got caught not seeing this coming. And that's part of what I mean, that this has never happened before. I can sort of understand it. Receivers have never agitated to get out like before their fourth year, before the draft.
Right.
Really, the biggest thing that happened was they really applied pressure early in the offseason, which it was a little different than like, I'm going to hold out in camp. That would have been one thing, but then it got them thinking, and I think the Titans had already spent all their money. They might not be a team that spends as much cash as other teams. Some teams are trying harder than others and spending more money than others. And I would not put the Titans high on that list of like, they could have made it work with A.J. Brown. And I think they got caught flat-footed and they had like no money left and they just did the best deal they thought they could. It was stupid.
We spoke off air. You told me to like treat you like Sam. So I'll just treat you like we're just having a conversation and I'm just going to go down my rabbit holes and everything and go off topic here. But we did have Rick Spielman on the show on Thursday, and I asked him the very important question. What happens when Kyler Murray deletes his Arizona Cardinals Instagram mentions? Like, what happens in the organization? Like, you call him the social media director in, and he basically said yes. Like, when you talked about A.J. Brown, like, they've changed the math on this thing. The fact that players are taken to Instagram to voice their displeasure and doing it a year earlier than they would from a contract standpoint, that is a big difference in this whole thing, right? Because you like to play team builder. We're doing it right now. I like to play it. But, like, we can't anticipate dude who's under contract now wants to get paid, 15 times as much, and you probably should do it. And if you don't do it, you got to trade him because players are taking to Instagram more. Players are, doing it a year earlier, and they're doing it at these high-value positions, and then, teams have to adjust, right? Like, the Cardinals weren't, like, they were probably planning on, we'll extend Kyler Murray, but a year from now, and then they have to do it now.
Right. And I think the Titans, though, should have been a little better prepared.
Sure.
I mean, because this was the offseason that they needed to pay A.J. Brown. And ultimately, if you went back to before the Robert Woods trade, I just believe that they wouldn't make that trade if they had known A.J. Brown was trying to get out. Like, they're looking at Woods like it's a number 2, and they were in a spot where they didn't have any cap space left. The thing is, though, they could have figured out a way to make more cap space if they really wanted to. Like, if the whole goal was to make the 2022 Titans team the best possible, they could have just spent more money. And I think that's the part where, like, that doesn't get talked about a lot, and maybe it wouldn't even have been the smart move, and that's like long term to push Derrick Henry's money into the future, or Taylor wants. It probably wouldn't have. So I'm not saying like that's even what they should have done, but they could have found a way to keep A.J. Brown is my point, and they didn't. I want to believe that Ryan Tannehill's resurgence can like stick a little more, because like I feel like he played better last year than his numbers showed, and I've always thought he was pretty good. I did this exercise in 2012, the first year I did QB Index. Actually, it wasn't watching every quarterback, it was just watching the class of 2012 on coach's film every week. So that was Andrew Luck, RG3, Tannehill, Russell Wilson, Nick Foles got in there for a minute, Brandon Weeden was the fifth first round. So I like watched every one of those snaps all year, and I was just like, this guy can play. This guy is a close to a league average starting quarterback as a rookie. And he finally got there above that, once he got to Tennessee.
We were always pegged as like Tannehill apologists, and it was in part because it felt like there was one year I had to like explain why Ryan Tannehill was our highest graded quarterback. I was like, it's week 2, right? And they're like, you think Ryan Tannehill's the best quarterback in the NFL? I'm like, no, he's just the highest graded through week 2. Like, it's like 2 weeks into the baseball season. You think this is a 450 hitter? Like, no, he's hitting 450 right now, and it's going to go down, But we were always pegged as Tannehill apologists because Yeah, he did grade comparable for us, comparable to Andrew Luck in those early years. He was Tannehill. I mean, at least rookie season, I think, because Luck turned it over so much. But Luck had a different play style where you knew you could put more on Luck. Luck had more on his plate. That's where you have to kind of like adjust for what they're dealing with.
Tannehill's never totally had the feel for the position, which is probably a hard thing to grade and quantify.
Right.
But it's just sort of clear that he doesn't process and make decisions as quickly as the best quarterbacks tend to. But he's got some other pretty great traits, which is like he has pretty good pocket movement. He stands in there, like he throws a pretty ball. He's pretty accurate. Like for the most part, he does some things well. And he got buried for that game, but they that reminded me of the Seahawks lost to the Cowboys in the playoffs, where they just like insisted on running the ball, even though it wasn't working the whole time. Even
like Tannehill's last interception, I forget the exact play, but I don't think it was on him, right? Wasn't it? It was tipped up or whatever it was.
Now, that said, I did try to like write down the quarterback tiers and stuff, and Tannehill's probably not. He's in that top 11, 12 that you talked about. He's probably right on the borderline of the next guys.
That's a good transition. They're a good segue right there, Greg, into quarter. Do you have any other rosters, though, that you wanted to hit on? Your best rosters in the NFL?
I think I kind of hit that. The Cardinals were a little worse, than I thought. No, I'm good. The Dolphins like gets to that point that I was talking about before, that like they don't really have a lot of excuses not to be good. They look pretty darn good if they can coach offensive line to be average. Like, and the Saints are another one where I do think people are tired of the Saints, but that's like it's a pretty great looking roster for the most part, assuming they get something out of Michael Thomas, which is a pretty big if.
I like the teams that just have such an extreme strategy. Whether it's the Rams never, picking in the first round, whether it's the Saints always seemingly in cap hell, but finding a way to get new players, trading up 5 times essentially to get Chris Olave, all of that stuff, and then seeing how it works out.
If you had told me that Tom and then now Gail Benson would be thought of as like the owners who go to the mat and like do everything possible financially and like to put the best team and like chase after that 11th win and stuff. Like if you had told me that 15, 20 years ago, I would have never believed it.
Yeah.
Like they were known as some of the worst, cheapest owners in sports. They tried to move the team to San Antonio after Katrina happened, like, which people conveniently forget. And like now it's like, I know there's probably smarter teams out there, but if I was a Saints fan, it's like, I'll take it. I'll take that they're like doing all this voodoo and trying to win every year. I'll take trying to win 11 games when you don't have a chance to win the title. Life is too short to just be like rebuilding. I just don't see rebuilding like working that well in the NFL. Like you can do both at once.
Yeah, and the Saints kind of play to their strengths, right? I mean, we always talk about how teams aren't good at drafting, historically, and it's like, well, the Saints have kind of bucked that trend, and because they've been able to buck that trend, they've been able to get away with some of that stuff, or just lean into that strength by being able to trade up to go get specific players or whatever it might be. So, Saints, Rams, the extremes, the Patriots, like they're always just fast. The Patriots now without Tom Brady, right? You learn a lot about Belichick and the system and how much was Tom and how much wasn't and all that stuff. And you learn a lot. That's what the NFL is about here, Greg.
Where are you at on Mac? Not to lead you into the next thing here, but
on Mac Jones,
yeah, because I've heard some like couple different podcasts or some on Twitter is like redrafting like those quarterbacks, the 2021 quarterbacks. It might have been your coworker Renner, who I'm a fan of, but I can't remember. It's like, and people are still keeping Zach Wilson over Mac Jones. And maybe I'm showing my fandom here, but it's like, what are we talking about? Doesn't the 1 year in the NFL matter like 3 times as much as whatever you thought you knew about players in college? That's sort of where I'm at, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So I think Mac Jones is good. I think he's a guy you can win with. The question's always going to be top 8, top 10. Like, is he that guy? But I think we look at upside. I just don't know. I'm going to talk myself in circles here. Coming off of Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, tapping into incredible physical skill sets in getting into their, getting close to their upside. may have skewed our perception that you can also reach your upside being on the Drew Brees, Tom Brady type of spectrum, which is what Mac Jones is. Now, he's not as good as those guys necessarily, but can he get...
I mean, he's certainly better through one season.
Yeah, it's
what it's worth.
I know, but it's so tough to compare 2021 to 01 and all that
you're
stuff.
right. It's impossible. But he reminds me more of Rivers, actually, than almost any quarterback since certainly a little more mobile than Rivers. But
yeah,
and like that's a pretty high ceiling. Like if you told me that's a borderline Hall of Fame ceiling, that to me he has a lot higher ceiling than I think. I mean, I would expect a little more Mac Jones hype. You know, I'm surprised.
No, I could see because he's good. I think it's tough for analysts to get behind. Well, he knows the offense really well, and people think, well, that won't get better. When actually, it's like, well, yeah, it will. Like you'll run the offense faster, and you'll make, like against the Colts, Mac Jones had 2 or 3 just terrible throws that essentially blow the game for them, right? Like late to the flat and just kind of lollipops them in and this and that. Like he'll cut down on some of those because he'll continue to grow within the offense. So Mac Jones is a good quarterback that you can win with, is the bottom line. I think people are still expecting the upside play of a Zach Wilson, of a Trevor Lawrence, of a Justin Fields. And because of all that, Mac Jones gets forgotten when he was by far the best rookie quarterback last year.
Right, and I just think his ceiling, why wouldn't it be a top 8 quarterback? Like
it can be.
Why wouldn't you think that throwing the ball accurately where you intend to and making quick decisions is like a huge skill set? Like why couldn't that improve? And I'm just like, now that you've seen 500 snaps of it at the NFL, Zach Wilson was one of the worst rookie quarterbacks I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Like that. Your evaluation, throw your evaluation out.
Oh, this whole 21 class. I mean, even throwing Trey Lance in there too. It's like, I get it, Personally,
the others I don't feel as strong about. It's more just like it feels like he has
the Zach Wilson.
Mac has a high ceiling, and Zach showed enough that like you have to be.
There are concerns.
Very concerned that you're like what is your hope that he's going to be average this year, which would be great if he was an average quarterback.
I really think the way the NFL has gone the last 3 or 4 years, because of the quarterbacks who have broken out into superstardom, has skewed the Mac Jones perception a little bit. I thought that during the draft process, people underrated Mac Jones during the draft process, and the fact that he came out of Alabama and they said,
really sound like a homer here though, just talking about Mac Jones the whole time. I think the thing too is like people got to really have an incredible degree of difficulty sliding scale for all rookie quarterbacks. Anytime there's a rookie quarterback that's league average-ish, I just sort of assume, well, that guy's going to have a great career. Like worst case scenario, if you could be league average as a rookie, you're going to be great. And if you're better than that, like a Herbert or Murray, then you're going to have an even greater career. But like if you can be where Mac Jones was, which I would say was a little better than league average, like you're going to be.
Is he going to be Kirk Cousins, right? I mean, is he also going to be that guy who's like right on the borderline where it's like he's definitely good enough to win with, but like, are we really going to win a championship with him?
I would say that would be a pretty disappointing outcome because I feel like he's sort of there as a rookie.
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, Cousins is good. Cousins is good, but lacking whatever it is to just go and win games. I don't know. There's a lot of things pointing in Mac Jones' favor too. I got into that whole like joint practice last year with the Giants. He was 56 for 63 against the Giants starters. I'm like, oh, that's it. He's awesome. But like that, you actually saw some of that on the field last year. Let's see when they put more on his plate this year.
His high end was quite high, like in actual NFL games.
Yeah,
that's all.
I think let's see when they put more on his plate, because that is what the difference is with a Cousins or a Tannehill, and that's what made Tom Brady so special, right? Like there were points in Brady's like second year as a starter, they're like, oh, we're going to throw the ball 26 straight times to start the game. Who cares about the run? We trust Tom Brady.
I feel like they did put a lot on his plate. Ultimately, there were a few game plans a little like that. They were playing like hurry up. Like he was calling a lot more protections and stuff like that for a rookie than almost any rookie I've seen. So I feel like that got a little overrated too. They did run the ball quite a bit.
He also had a game where he threw the ball 3 times.
Right. I mean, he had some clunkers. Every rookie's going to have some clunkers.
Yeah.
And there were some bad ones.
Where's Mac Jones fall in the QB index? 2?
Right.
Right behind Patrick Mahomes?
No, I have him in that third. I have him like in a third tier. Obviously, you can tell I'm optimistic. So that would be in like the 13 to 18 range. And
Mac
that's
Jones
where Tannehill,
or Drew Bledsoe? Who would you take?
Who? Wait, Mac Jones or Drew Bledsoe?
Or Drew Bledsoe.
Who's going to have a better career?
Yeah.
I would take Mac Jones.
Ooh.
I mean, it's a tough one.
It is.
I mean, I certainly, if you had asked me 2 years into Drew Bledsoe's career, I would have taken Drew Bledsoe.
Oh, man, the hype. The hype with Bledsoe is incredible. All right, so, yeah, let's go your top quarterback tier. Who are the best quarterbacks in the NFL?
This is basically in no particular order, but I would go Mahomes, Herbert, Allen, Brady, Rodgers in some order, depending on what you're depending on the parameters of what you're asking for. Those would be the 5.
No Joe Burrow versus Herbert. Burrow versus Herbert debate. This is very intense. This is important here. Herbert over Burrow for you?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that's where maybe I'm like the NFL falling into that. It's not by much. And Burrow, I should probably put him up one. What would you? Would you put him in there?
Yeah, I think I'm usually of the mind I need one more year of evidence for a lot of these guys.
That's all it is that Herbert's played 2 years, and I was so convinced of how good he would be after one, but wanted to see one more, and then saw it, that I'm like, okay. And the physical stuff. I
needed to see one more year of elite Josh Allen before I apologized. I needed to see one more year of elite-ish Justin Herbert. You know, in honestly, that's where I really thought that the NFL was going to transition to not having a top 8 clear-cut quarterback world, but maybe we are. I think we are getting a more defined list of top.
I think it's so deep. 8. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a time where there's this many teams that feel pretty good about their quarterbacks.
No, I agree.
Think that the top 12 or so is pretty deep. Like Burrow should be there. I'm going to get Bengals fans. He should be there, but you just want to.
They're banging down the walls.
And I had him in the QB index.
Right now.
Like throughout the first half of last season, when his numbers were good, not great. Like I had him in the top 8 to 10 the whole time. I was like, he's already a top 10 quarterback. Yeah. I'm kind of stunned by it. I was not expecting it. He was there the whole year. It wasn't just like him playing better at the end. If anything, I would say his worst stretch of play, if you could call it that, was in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't bad, but I would say he was even better before that.
But when we talk about like Mac Jones and putting more on his plate, like there was definitely a line where the Bengals said, okay, Joe Burrow, go win games for us, right? We're going to drop back 50 times and he's throwing for 500 yards and all that stuff in their biggest games. You know, I think that's going back to the Mac Jones debate, or like even a Ryan Tannehill discussion or a Kirk Cousins discussion. That's what you want to see, right? If you're going to believe in this guy and you have a quarterback that's going to be the reason why you win. I think Burrow's already proven that, right? Herbert's already proven that. We've gotten these guys have proven that they're at that level, that they'll be the reason why you win. And I think the Bengals kind of like, you know, just let him. They unleashed Burrow down the stretch last year, and he had some of those big games. So
I forget which game it was. I almost felt like there was like a part in one game where that was the case. It might have been the 49ers loss, actually, where the defense didn't finish the job. But you're right. At a certain point, they handed it over to him. And even partly that Chargers game where they ended up getting blown out, but like they just let him go and like he makes you want to believe that any mild shortcomings he has physically doesn't matter anyways, because I was so wrong about his arm strength going into last year. Like it got better. People's arms can get better.
Oh, did you get caught up in some of like, you know, the Twitter folks were making fun of Joe's arm? I don't think it was like.
I was just a little skeptical of like the ceiling, coming off, and at least just for last year, coming off a torn ACL, and I had a little concern about the like outside throws as a rookie, like that combination. I figured wasn't going to be great, and he proved that wrong pretty quick.
Yeah, well, him and Mac Jones have good timing, anticipation, and accuracy outside the numbers. I think it makes up for the arms not being as good. So, how big is your second tier of quarterbacks then? Because I always use top 8.
I have Joe, and this is in order, some sort of. Joe would have been first in that.
Yeah.
Sort of borderline. And then I also have Lamar, Dak, Kyler, Stafford, whatever you're doing with Watson. If we're including him in there, he's in there somewhere, probably closer to the front, just on skill. And then Russell Wilson too.
And Russell Wilson. And then I assume that next border involves like the Kirk Cousins and Derek Carrs of the world.
Yeah, the next one is then Derek Carr, Cousins, Mack, Tannehill. You have to deal with Trevor Lawrence here somewhere. I don't really know what to do with him. He's
got to earn it. Just put him in.
To me, he's like a wait and see. But if you were just like starting a team, I still get the idea that he would be more valuable than some of these guys.
Yeah. I think that's fair. And so maybe that's what's changed about the NFL. Again, I keep referencing this like 10 to 15 year period where the top 8 quarterbacks, I think were pretty clear, especially in hindsight when it's like Brady, Breeze, Manning, Rodgers in their own world. And then, say Luck, Wilson, Rivers, Ryan, Roethlisberger. Like it was a pretty, am I missing one or two maybe, but the top 8 to 10 I think was pretty clear. And then Stafford was like that border.
I was doing these silly rankings like every year. I can go back and look at like, Stafford, where Stafford has bounced around. Sometimes he was in the back end of the top 10. And sometimes he was more like 13 to 15,
And I think even just like looking at our grades, when you go back and look at that decade or so, it's like he's QB 11. Stafford's QB 11, right? In his era. Cam Newton was always middle of the pack, right? There was a pretty clear cut, like, this is the top 8. This is the top 9 or 10, whatever it was. I think we're starting to define that now for the next era, because as of a couple years ago, we were waiting for a big chunk of those guys to retire or regress, and it was like, okay, who's gonna be next besides Mahomes? And I think we're starting to see that with Herbert and Burrow and Josh Allen now putting back-to-back years together, and Dak has taken his game to the next level, I think, over the last 2+ years. So I think the top 12 to 14 quarterbacks might be to your point, I think maybe the strongest that group has been for a long time.
Right. If Carr and Cousins and like Matt Ryan right now are middle of the pack, that's pretty strong to me. And the top end is like those 2 games from Josh Allen. It's almost good that they lost, because like I'll just always remember those 2 games as like about as high level quarterback play as I've ever seen.
Stupid good. I mean, but then you start to think, well, what if he had 2 more of those? Then that's like it's up like 89 Montana's run.
Then he's like stuff. Nick Foles 2017.
Nick Foles 2 game stretch in the playoffs is still.
I was at both of those games, and like that, I feel like it's not like it gets slept on, but it's like. If you look at his 6 best throws in each one of those games, I mean, you couldn't be better. You really couldn't have played any better.
It's like why are we even podcasting right here? Like, why are we even talking about what's going to happen in the season when Nick Foles could come out of nowhere and then play like a Hall of Fame quarterback for two games and win the Super Bowl? That's what I felt like coming out of that. Can't predict anything.
I mean, I was a Patriots fan watching Brady's like best Super Bowl performance end up in a loss to Nick Foles, weirdly. It was pretty stunning, but you sort of have to just hand it to him. That was a fun team. That was a fun Eagles team.
That Eagles team was incredible. Like it's the team I always point to that for the NFL folks that are always like, got to win in the trenches. I'm like, the Eagles have won in the trenches for 10 straight years. And then the one year where they were so good at receiver and corner, they won the Super Bowl and had Carson.
That's the one team I wish I mentioned in the rosters, by the way, because the Eagles are loaded this year in the trenches again. There's no they could be a Super Bowl caliber type of team if things really broke right. Their rosters, great. Hurts was a tough guy on the quarterbacks of where to put, because if he's just like a little better than last year, like he belongs in that tier. With Carr and Cousins and Ryan. I just want to see it again. It's a different style of play, certainly, but he was quite effective.
Hurts is a tough one because I think his style is in that the quarterback that holds the ball too long bucket, which ranges from Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson to like Ryan Tannehill to Tyrod to like this is Justin Fields, right? Holds the ball too long, probably scrambles a little bit. But because teams embrace the quarterback running game and the fact that Jalen Hurts can just go out and rush for 600 or 700 yards and 10 touchdowns in a year, brings a ton of value that offsets maybe pass game deficiencies, I think. So
well, but it also makes the pass game easier. Like they were absolutely Ravens south, north. Where is Philly compared to Baltimore? North?
Might be lateral.
I mean, I feel like just people watch that playoff game and didn't watch a lot of the 1 p.m. Eagles starts. And Hurts was rock solid, including as a passer in a lot of those. Like that, I really think he doesn't need to be better for them to win the East necessarily or win 11 games. And if he is better, which is quite possible, he improved a lot, I think, since college and since his rookie year, then they're a contender and they're a title contender.
I still can't get over it. It was like night and day when Tua took over for him at Alabama. It was like, here's this pretty good Alabama passing offense, and then Tua came in, and it's like, wow, now it's fast and it's efficient and it's explosive, and it just Tua was such a much better, it seemed seemingly a much better college player than Jalen Hurts. But then Hurts, even when he had another opportunity and he went to Oklahoma, he did get better. You know, he did improve. And for me, sometimes it's tough to like wrap my head around that. Where I'm
adult and I take Saturdays off. I've got kids. You've got even more kids.
Oh, I can't watch. Yeah, I got the 4.
I just ignore college football and then just evaluate it once they get to the pros. And for the most part, I don't think that hurts.
No, that's fine. I've had to Saturday's my one off day now, so I do have to hang out with the kids. Now, if they want to watch some college football as they get older, I'm not going to argue. But generally, we're like apple picking or something now. You know, we got fall activities now with the kids. Any other hot takes you want to drop here on the PFF NFL podcast?
Wow, you're just like opening for hot takes. Well, I don't want Tuanon to be mad. The next group would have been like Jameis, Hurts, Baker, wherever he lands, Tua. I'm sort of taking Fields and Mills and Trevor Lawrence out a little bit, but they would be somewhere in here. We just haven't seen much. I mean, their potential would be higher, but we just want to see a little more.
We kind of, as a company, I didn't do any of the writing, but we did. You know, it's off-season list season, right? So here's your top 32 quarterbacks, and we're ranking everything. We did a little bit, copped out a little bit this year, and we put them into like neat little named tiers. And so the Fields, Wilson, it's like it's the year 2, we'll see what happens tier, you know, like whatever we called it, you know, and it's like, it doesn't have to be this 1 to 32 list now. We can cop out and say, we don't know. We need more information.
You can do what you want.
I like those.
But I also would think that like Davis Mills now is like in that mix.
He has to.
I don't know. I sort of feel like I would rather have Davis Mills than Zach Wilson. I don't know. I don't think that's that hot a take, though.
You're so out on Zach Wilson, huh? I have this like, he was like pretty good as a freshman, but he didn't break out until late. I have this unsubstantiated theory that players might develop similarly in college as they do in the NFL. I have not backed it up at all, but like there might be like slow starters in college that eventually figure it out who also do the same thing in the NFL. I think you'd be banking on that for Zach Wilson. He wasn't bad as a freshman or anything like that, but he was good. You know, he's fine. But he didn't like when I first saw Jameis Winston play football, I was like, whoa, this redshirt freshman is awesome. He's going to be a number 1 overall pick. Andrew Luck, he'll be a number 1 overall pick. With Zach Wilson, it's like, he's a pretty good quarterback. And then he progressed and looked awesome by his last year. Maybe there's something to that.
Absolutely. And some guys like top picks, Eli, Alex Smith come to mind as just, I mean, people forget how bad Eli was as a rookie.
I know.
Alex Smith was one of the worst NFL quarterbacks possible. He was on the worst possible situation and group of quarterbacks where they were all that bad. So it was certainly the team too. And then second year, they both immediately were like league average or close to it. And it was like, okay, these guys are solid. And so
but Alex Smith didn't become good until year 5. Like Alex Smith wasn't actually good until maybe year 5.
He had one. It's a little misleading. He had a weird career arc because his year 2 with Norv Turner, he was pretty good that year. I mean, he was league average. Whereas like, okay, this guy's going to be fine. This is not going to be someone I feel bad about that. He got taken 23 picks ahead of Rodgers, all this stuff. And then he kind of fell off again for 2 or 3 more years until Harbaugh showed up because Norv Turner got a job. Everyone was like, oh, wow, Norv Turner fixed Alex Smith. Let's go give him a job again. That must have been Dallas.
That's right.
But I just think, like, not to ramble a little bit, it's like,
do it.
I just feel like that Mills, like the tape you saw in 10 games in the NFL should matter a lot. He looked he looked like he had a lot going on. That they got made fun of a little bit for that pick, and that's going to turn into one of the best 3rd round picks in that draft, if not the best. I mean, it has a chance to be a total steal. And if he ends up being like a mediocre starting quarterback, that's like an amazing 3rd round pick.
Our own guy, Mike Renner, was one of the people that made fun of him. And Mike was wrong. I don't think And
I
think I didn't love the pick because they didn't have any other picks. And I probably got caught up in like, man, this roster is so bad. They just need players, right? And they'll figure out quarterback later. But the other part of me also says there's never a bad pick on a quarterback. Like, I think Kellen Mond, the third-round pick, is also a good pick, even if he can't even see the field, because the payout is like the payout of a Davis Mills. If he does become a league average year 2 quarterback, that payout is incredible for a third rounder.
He has some toolsy things though too. It's not like he's without talent. He reminds me a little of Tannehill too.
Yeah. Well, he also would have been if he went back. I think he probably came out a year early. Like if he went back to Stanford and played football, are we talking about Davis Mills and Kenny Pickett as the 2 first-round picks this past year?
Yeah, probably.
Potentially with the way this quarterback class went. So it's not that crazy. Was that your hot take? Do you have anything else?
I didn't know I had to come with like one final hot take. I'm looking at the rest of these.
I put you on the spot.
Tiers, and it's just like picking on Sam Darnold or Carson Wentz.
Poor Sam. What if Sam figures it out here? What if he's the next Rich Gannon? Just figures it out.
I mean, I think they'll end up with Mayfield, which is hilarious. Just because they already were willing to trade for him, and they've kind of made it clear they're still willing to add a quarterback to that room, so they'll probably end up with him. But this whole idea, I've seen sort of like this notion. It's like, well, Baker and Sam, you have 2 guys. Like those are not the 2 same guys. One of them is one of the least productive quarterbacks of the last 40 years in Sam Darnold, and one of them's a guy who's had some pretty high highs and pretty low lows, but he's had some high highs at least.
Where do you stand on Baker then? Is that I think you summed it up, right? I always describe it as 2 out of his 4 years have been really good for Baker Mayfield. You don't know what you're going to get, but 2 out of 4 have been really good.
He has enough limitations that I wouldn't want him because I feel like you're kind of, you would rather have someone predictable if you're in the middle.
Yeah.
Like he obviously throws a beautiful ball and it is pretty accurate when he can see it, but like the processing and getting rid of the ball is just not totally there. Pretty early on, I was like, I thought he was Kirk Cousins, and now I'm like, he might not even be Kirk Cousins. And that's not a down, that's not like slamming the guy. If he had Kirk Cousins, it's his career. He'd be one of the richest quarterbacks in history.
Well, to be Kirk Cousins, you got to be Kirk Cousins off the field too, where you're just maximizing 3-year contracts left and right, getting franchise tagged and the whole deal.
But I also think, if you're Matt Rule, you're not going to have your job next year if you win 3 games. Baker Mayfield is a way better idea than trying Sam Darnold and Matt Corral.
And the Panthers at least made some moves on the offensive line. I like their offseason a lot more this year than I did last year. The Panthers, with a good quarterback, could be much better than they were.
Right. I think it's worth a shot. I mean, This isn't a hot take, but I think if they had just kept Teddy, and I have too much of a soft spot for Teddy, but if they had just kept Teddy, they were with the defense they had a year ago, they probably, they would have had a better record.
Definitely would have been better.
And they might have, they might have been okay. They might have had a winning record. If you had put Teddy on with that, they would have been okay.
Where do you stand on Seattle and what they're doing? Because Baker could he end up there? He's better than Drew Lock, I think.
This could be wrong because I've learned not to trust these things totally, but it's been right so far. It was just I don't think they want him. I don't think they wanted Baker.
Yeah.
Whether it's his play or I get the feeling more of that they don't want him as their guy.
They just don't want him as their guy.
They can't see him as their guy. So it's why don't we just go with Gino and Drew Lock? I'm surprised they like Drew Lock, but I think they sneaky like Gino and think if we end up starting Gino 13 games, we'll be fine with that. Whether that's a good idea or not, I'm not sure, but he could be all right.
Sitting in this seat where my job's not on the line, I think I always think from a long-term perspective that maybe teams don't, and I'm just of the mind, if I don't know who my quarterback is, I'll pay a little bit of money to see if Baker Mayfield might be that guy going forward. That's all. I would take year 5 of Baker Mayfield, get him in my building, and if it works out, maybe I re-sign him and he becomes my guy. If not, we just move on, and it's fine. So. Right.
I'm not a big Baker guy, and I'm the biggest Gino guy there is. And even I agree with you. That's why not just try out another guy?
2013 draft Twitter with everybody loved Gino.
It was more 2014, the last 4 games of the season. I remember writing a piece. We used to do this piece called Making the Leap. And if those last 4 games of Gino Smith, and he never got to start the next season because that's when he got knocked out by Ike Mbali. He showed a lot. He showed what the draft Knicks were hoping for. And since he's played since, you've kind of seen it. I think he's probably a little closer to the 25th best quarterback in the league than people want to admit. And if the Seahawks agree with that, then they're just going to.
So there's the hot take I'm looking for. Gino Smith, QB 25, lock it in. Because you write I used to do more writing, but sometimes you're looking for a story. And Gino Smith, if you go back through the PFF grades, I used to call him Mr. Week 17. Gino Smith, he would just crush it the last week of the season.
Well, that was the thing. He won that. It was the last game of the Rex Ryan era, I believe. It was the end of that 4-game stretch, and that 4-game stretch, he played quite well for 4 games. And I was like, all right, I think you got something.
And then Sam Darnold did the same thing. He was like QB2 by our grades the last 4 games of the season. So as storytellers, it's fun to want to tell stories, right? Oh, this guy improved. He did it in the last 4 weeks of the season, right? Or whatever it might be. And then I've learned through the years that sometimes telling the good story that makes sense actually makes no sense from a data standpoint, and you actually shouldn't do that. So sometimes
I've
the good
also learned
stories
the last 4 games count as games 8 through 10 or 8 through 12.
It's the same. Of course.
We tend to overrate the late push.
But when players are young, we all think real life is Madden, right? We think the players are going to get better and they'll be better at the end of the season than they are at the beginning and all that stuff, and it's just not real. So anyway, Greg, it's been awesome. I appreciate all the time here. Tell everybody where they can find everywhere that you are.
Around the NFL Podcast. Check it out on Twitter. That's enough.
I assume we have a lot of crossover listeners. I'm sure a lot of people have Around the NFL and the PFF NFL Podcast, probably just back to back.
I hope so. I mean, I like sharing it, even though I'm gonna feel bad after we hang up. I'm gonna feel bad that I started by jabbing you right off the top or jabbing.
You were giving constructive criticism, but if you guys have me on your show, I'll go down the line and just start giving.
We got to do that. We got to do it now. This is the time of year to do it. I'm a big the podcast is in the room, and if you come to LA, we will definitely have you in that room. But the off season is the time where it doesn't always have to be in the room. We got to get Steve on. But I'd love to have you in person, if only because I'm, if you round up 5'6", so it would be a nice contrast us next to it.
It is funny because people think that Sam is 5'6" because of me.
Right, he says that.
Right.
Well, and he talks a lot about his very small, tiny hands, which is good. It shows he's comfortable.
Right.
But so he has smaller hands than me, but he's not 5'6" apparently.
So
I have no idea.
I would love to do it in person at some point as well, because I'll be brutally honest with you as well. Our listeners don't like guests. We don't like guests. We don't like non-PFF guests. It's just what the people have said, and I've broken that to bring Rick Spielman on back-to-back shows, because I think you're a good enough guest that we can buck the trend, that we can work against the data, and the people will like it.
But I get it. I'm kind of like that with podcasts too. Non-sports podcasts, whatever. I don't need the guests. I'm there for the people.
Yeah. So we're just being honest with each other here.
I'm there for that sizzling Steve and Sam chemistry.
The chemistry. The chemistry is great. Well, we appreciate that. It's always nice to have a dedicated listener, on the show with us here, and a Massachusettsian, even if you're on the New York side. So appreciate it, Greg.
LA now. All right, Steve.
Go listen to him Around the NFL. Thank you. All right, thanks to Greg once again for being a part of the show. I definitely want to join them at some point if we can. Just want to reiterate that whole group there, in the late Chris Wessling, just an awesome podcast they do. It's just, you listen to those guys and you listen to that whole team, and it's like, hey, they're friends, they have fun, they enjoy football, they enjoy each other's company. I think that's what podcasting is all about. So we really did, Sam and I, listened through the years and seen how they've grown, and learned a lot from what they do at the Around the NFL podcast. So really appreciate that whole team over there. Appreciate Greg taking all that time to discuss the NFL. And for us, I love Sam. I love his takes. I'm sure he loves mine, but it is always good to get slightly different perspectives here on the podcast and have some good football discussions. I believe that's what we've done with the last 2 shows, with Gregg on here and then with Rick Spielman last Thursday. So appreciate having those guests, having Rick and having Gregg over these last couple shows. Don't forget, you can get 25% off any PFF subscription using the code NFL Pod. With any PFF subscription, you get all the locked article content. You get the fantasy football rankings. Projections are coming soon. All of the gambling apps and all the fun stuff that we're building. PFF grades from the 2021 season, upcoming 2022 season, and much more. So all of it is 25% off using the promo code NFL Pod. So thanks to everybody for tuning in today on this Memorial Day. We'll be back here on Thursday. It is the 32 Reasons for Optimism, one for each team, with PFF's own and newly engaged Trevor Sikkema. So be sure to send Trevor a congratulations. He'll be on the show here Thursday as we tell you why your team should be optimistic for the 2022 season. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you Thursday.